Force feedback is a technology in racing simulators that generates forces on your steering wheel to replicate how the steering wheel of a real car feels. It's the single most important feature in your racing simulator, and we need it in sim racing because it's our main form of communication with the physics of a race car, since we can't feel the G-forces we do in real life. The force feedback replicates the forces of the front tires on a car. Before we move into settings and technicalities, let's learn how to benefit from the force feedback to drive at a professional level. When you turn the steering wheel, your front tires create a lateral force and the car starts turning. Right away, because of the positive caster angle that cars have, a self-centering force is created. This force means that the front tires want to come back to a straight position, and you can feel it through your steering wheel, which is how you can tell what is the state of the car. Through the force feedback, you can feel if the car is understeering or not, and if the car is oversteering or not. Although you also need the visual information combined with the force feedback to understand these states. The force you feel on the steering wheel changes consistently based on how much grip the front tires have, the front tires. To understand how to reach peak grip, to extract peak force from the tire, which will make you carry the most speed possible through any corner, you also need to understand slip angle. I'm working on a video on slip angle right now, so if it's ready, you should be able to find it in the link right here on the top right or in the description. In short, the closer to the optimal slip angle of the tires, the more forces we can extract from them, and the stronger the force feedback will feel. This is extremely important because 99% of the drivers out there don't know that you can literally feel the levels of grip directly from your steering wheel. And this is also why it's so important to relax your hands and use what I call the light hands technique, so that you can communicate with the steering and feel the grip variations with precision. Just so you know how important this is, if you grip the steering wheel with the right strength, and your force feedback is set up right, you can literally feel whether your trail braking is right, whether your downshifting and engine braking is right. You can feel the effects of ABS, and this is a big one. You can feel the changes in grip, camber off camber, crest or compression, all this through the force feedback. It's like a language telling you exactly what's happening with the car at all times with split-second precision. I hope this helps you understand the value of what we're talking about here. Now, how do we know if we're understeering or oversteering? Through the force feedback. If we are understeering, the front tires are giving up because they've gone past the optimal slip angle and are now sliding and creating less lateral force. Because they are creating less lateral force against the track, the self-centering force we feel is weaker and the steering gets lighter. Basically, we feel as if the steering gives up resisting the input and the steering feels a little bit dead. All of that while we can visually notice that the car is actually rotating less and not going through the line you want it to go. If we are oversteering, the front tires continue gripping well against the track, but the rear tires give up and the car starts rotating a lot more towards the inside, and we can see that extra rotation visually while still feeling a strong force feedback on the steering. It's interesting to notice that when you're oversteering, if we relax our hands and let the steering do its thing, this self-centering force we feel actually continues forcing the steering past the center, past 0 degrees of steering angle, because although the car is sliding, the front tires still want to point where they're going. In this scenario, it's probably more clarifying to call this a counter-steering force, not a self-centering force. This force happens naturally, so if you just relax your hands in an oversteer car, you will see it will try to correct itself instantly, which is why it's so useful to work on your light hands technique. I have a full lesson about that in my online course. Pro tip, you can actually feel how much grip you have on your front tires by feeling the amount of force you get in your steering. More force, more grip. Less force, less grip. This is extremely useful to understand how important the pedals are in managing the balance of the car because of weight transfer between the front and rear tires, and how this affects the rotation of the car. For example, if you are understeering, less force, less grip on the fronts, less steering feeling. Steering feels light. But if you lift the throttle or starts brushing the brakes, you shift weight to the front, increasing the grip and consequently the force you feel on the steering, while noticing visually that the car is rotating more towards the inside of the corner. All of that without the need to even change the steering angle. The best way you can use the force feedback to find lap times and maximize the grip usage of the tire is to chase the peak force from the steering. By keeping the front tires laterally loaded, specifically mid-corner, without abusing them and going past the optimal slip angle they can handle, you can maximize the front load and consequently the rear load as well, since the rear tires are always reacting to the front tires. So if your driving style gets you into those light steering moments where it feels unresponsive, you're probably doing something wrong. Always try to manage your weight transfer so that the front tires are always in the peak force feedback resistance. Note that the real benefit of the force feedback is to feel the variation of forces, so that you can judge what's happening with the car at all times. That's why you have to avoid clipping, which means reaching 100% of the force capacity of your steering wheel, because any extra force sent by the simulator will not be felt. Ideally, some clipping is fine, but you want to find the right setting so that the clipping happens for no longer than a fraction of a second, and only if you hit curbs or big bumps. But let's say you have the wrong settings and you end up clipping your force feedback too early into the corner. What happens is that you just feel heavy steering, but with no life, no response, no variation in force, and you won't feel any change in grip on the front tires, which can make your driving a lot less precise and just slower. So if you have a wheelbase that doesn't have a lot of force, for example, like somewhere between 2 and 6 Newton meters, don't fall into the temptation of cranking the force feedback up just so it feels heavy, because with a lot of clipping, you won't be able to drive with precision. It's better to set up properly, even if it feels too light, because this way you're gonna feel the variation in force, and that's where you find the time. In iRacing, you can see if you're clipping through the force feedback meter on the top right. By default, you can turn this meter on by pressing F on your keyboard, but you can also turn it on through the settings in the menu. By the way, it's important to know that clipping does not mean reaching peak force capacity of the base necessarily. It means reaching peak force capacity that you selected in the base. For example, if you get your wheelbase to be at 30% force, but you increase the simulator force feedback a lot, it will max out those 30% very quickly, and you get a lot of bad clipping, and you will actually feel a very light and dead force feedback at the same time, because it's stuck at that very low force that you set up anyways. So what is too much force feedback? The force feedback force is measured in Newton meters. You can find wheelbases that range from 2 Newton meters all the way to 30 Newton meters or more. To understand these values better, let's explore some real-life comparisons of how much force we would feel. In modern urban cars with power steering assistance, the force we feel is around 2 to 4 Newton meters. In older urban cars with no power steering assistance, the force is around 6 to 10 Newton meters. In go-karts, the force we feel is around 7 to 12 Newton meters, and in professional karts, between 10 and 15 Newton meters. In race cars with no power steering, like a Formula Ford, a Formula 4, or older touring cars, the forces vary between 12 and 20 Newton meters. In race cars with power steering, the force varies from 4 to 8 Newton meters in GT4 cars, from 5 to 10 Newton meters in GT3 cars, between 10 and 15 Newton meters in higher downforce cars like LMP2s, Formula 1s, Formula 2s. IndyCar currently has one of the heaviest steering wheels because they don't have any power steering assists, and they have over 25 Newton meters of steering force. For sim racing, most top-level drivers will choose between 10 and 15 Newton meters. This is a range good enough to provide precision in corner entries with initial steering inputs, and not too strong that it ends up hurting you long term, especially because sim racers can spend many hours every day practicing and racing. But wait, there are so many wheelbases out there with over 20 Newton meter capacity. Should I use all of it? Well, here's the thing. A 15 Newton meter base that is maxed out at 15 Newton meter will perform a little bit worse than a 30 Newton meter capable base that is set up to 15 Newton meters. That's because when there's extra headroom in the wheelbase, it will perform better even at lower strengths because it will be able to deliver 15 Newton meters a lot more quickly with a lot more detail and precision, and it will be capable of sustaining those forces more, giving you a more consistent experience. So yeah, you get a little bit of an extra benefit by having a stronger base, even if you don't use it maxed out. Is it better to train on a higher force feedback and actually lower it for the racing? No. Choose a comfortable strength and stick with it. You will create a muscle memory for it, and the less you change the settings around, the more precise your driving is going to be. There's no point in treating the force feedback as a gym workout. What is considered a good force feedback? For example, in my Miata in iRacing, how can I know if it's too soft or too heavy? Well, my approach to force feedback in sim racing is to always keep it as consistent as possible, even when I'm changing between cars that in real life have drastically different force feedback levels. The reason is that in real life, your body quickly adapts to the changes in force feedback because we have many other factors like posture and G-forces and that completely change the environment anyways. In sim racing though, your environment is always the same, so you want to be extremely precise and competitive. It's better to keep the forces very similar even if you're driving drastically different cars. In iRacing, for example, that means changing the force from car to car in-game so that it can match the almost clipping scenario that you want to have in your wheelbase, so that you can always get that same window of forces regardless of what car you drive. So for example, if you're set up to 12 Newton meter, always have it pretty strong so that you can feel between 8 and 12 all the time. If you have it at 12 but the force feedback is too low and you're always playing between 4 and 5, 6 Newton meter, you're really not using that good range that you're used to. To better understand how the force feedback in iRacing works, let's go through the settings and what they really do in the force feedback. All right, so linear mode, always have that on. Even if you have a very weak 2 Newton meter wheelbase, the linear mode should be on. When you have it off, it's just not worth it. It kind of tries to exaggerate some of the forces, and it's just gonna make it less precise for you. It's better to have it linear. It's gonna feel lighter. It's gonna feel a little bit less interesting, but the detail you're gonna feel, it's gonna give you one-to-one grip information of the front tires. So definitely worth it to have it on. And then the strength here, that's something very cool to talk about, because if you click on the word right now, strength, if you click on the title, it changes from strength that goes up as you go right to max force. And the number actually goes down when you move the slider to the right. So it's very useful to know how this works. If you click on the word strength, and now it shows max force, this value is how much the simulated car needs to hit in the actual simulated steering wheel torque that the simulated driver would feel to trigger 100% of your steering wheel. Now, if the car is very light, for example, let's call it, you drive the Miata, that car, you will get around 20 Newton meter in it. So if you move the slider up to 20 Newton meter, now when that virtual car reaches 20 Newton meter, it triggers 100% of your base. If you have it at 40, then what's gonna happen? The virtual car is gonna reach up to 20 Newton meters, and then it's gonna trigger only 50% of your base. That's why it's gonna feel very light. This is why when you increase the value, you're triggering 100% at lower values, 100% of your wheel base force at lower values. That's why this number goes down when you move the slider to the right. Now, you don't even have to worry too much about that because the auto function in iRacing works pretty well. Now, the wheel force, this slider is literally just asking you what is the wheelbase set. What is the force you set in the wheelbase? For example, right now I have mine maxed out at 11, so I can click here and go straight to 11. I clicked auto and it went to 12. I don't know why, but that's a very similar value. If I were to move my strength down to 8, then it would be better to move it here back to 8, because the way this works is it's asking you what is the force you chose outside iRacing, so that the auto function works properly and gives you the best force feedback. So in my case, let's go back to 12, 11, and then I go here to 11. Now, this third one, intensity, it's gonna be how much do you want the auto function to be in terms of strength. If you go to 100, it's not gonna clip. It's not gonna be too much that you're gonna get bad clipping, because the software knows and wants to avoid bad clipping. When you go to 100, it's gonna be on that 80% to 100% range, which is what I really recommend. So that's what I have. I always run it at 100%. And then when I go and drive, I can just go here and click on the auto function. And now it's changing the value here of the max force to 40 Newton meters. Or if I click on the title, it moves to the strength value at 24.3. And then I can drive, and I can guarantee that it's not going to be bad clipping. So you can see right now, if I start to get a lot of weight on the front tires, it gets a little bit of clipping. Actually, you can see that it did get red, but it's really at the 95%. It's not really reaching 100% and staying there. So it's pretty much using all of the settings, all of the force that I have set in my base, which is optimal. What I really recommend you to do always is to set the base force to something that you find comfortable, and then you just use the auto function in iRacing for every car you drive, because then you don't have to worry about specifically what is the ideal number for each car. It's a little bit too much work. So just use the auto function. What about force feedback effects? Should we use them? Many brands offer many different options for effects in terms of force feedback. You can get damping, friction, inertia, curb effects, road effects, oversteer effect, understeer effects. The list keeps going on and on. The problem is that most of these effects are actually more distracting than anything. In the high-level esports competitive world, I found that most drivers use the least effects possible and at the lowest levels possible. The pure signal that you get from the simulator is the most precise state you can get. On top of that pure signal, if the signal is a little bit too clean, too sharp, you can add a little bit of dampening or smoothing, but no more than 10 to 15%. Understeer and oversteer effects are useless. They will always create some weird behaviors that are not that useful on the long term. Curb and road effects might be good for immersion, but they're not gonna make you faster. There you go. I felt like we were missing a video about force feedback, and I saw that there's no real complete explanation about that on YouTube. So I hope this helps you, and I will leave you with a small video about my free driver technique guide. Yep. If you're a racing driver and you want to reach an advanced level, there's a faster and easier way to become competitive. I've gone from this to this in 5 years. Now, we've created the perfect free driver development guide to help you understand the right order of racing skills to develop if you want to become a competitive driver as quickly as possible. This guide was made after 3,000 hours of combined high-level coaching.